Alright guys, it's finally time to continue to learn about the Pirc Defense, and this time we're not going to go over another new variation. We're going to see the classical variation in the hands of the great Michael Adams. Guys, super strong GM using the Pirc Defense against another strong Grandmaster, and I wanted to show you this game because there are so many things that we talked about already in our playlist, but there are new ideas that I need you to get familiarized with. And in this game specifically, you can see how the white pieces chose to play the classical variation. And let me actually go all the way back. Notice how they started with pawn to d4, queen's pawn opening. So if anything, we should be getting a king's Indian defense. However, the black pieces, Michael Adams here played pawn to d6. Now, there's one book that some of my students have, which is called Play d6 Against Anything. And it's a very interesting idea, right? So from here we have e4, so it's the same thing now as if they had played e4 first, d6, d4, and we just transpose into the Pirc Defense. Now guys, this game is very important because not only do we transition from queen's pawn opening to king's pawn opening, but now you're going to see how the black pieces use ideas from the Sicilian defense, the dragon variation. So let me just get going. So here you can see bishop e2. In our lesson number 69, we talked about this variation with bishop c4. But notice how bishop e2 is still very playable. It gets very interesting position. So after bishop e2, we have castling, castling. And at this point, I told you that I like to play one of two plans. I like to do pawn to c6 or bishop to g4. Guys, sorry if you already went over lesson 69, but I think you could use a refresher, right? Now, this is not the only way that you have to continue from this moment on. You could also do something like knight c6. You could even do a6. Like one of my favorite players of all times is Vladimir Epishin, and he plays the Pirc, but more often than not, he plays it with a6, not what I like. So anyhow, after castling, here the black pieces played bishop g4. And I'm so glad that I'm showing you this game because I know that we have talked a lot about c6. Bishop g4, I haven't showed you so many games on it. So after bishop g4 here, the white pieces went bishop e3, and then we have knight to c6. Guys, from this moment on, you're going to see the spirit of the Pirc Defense. You're going to see this hypermodern approach. Don't forget, the idea of these openings is to allow your opponent to control the center. Then we're going to strike it, and we're going to be playing more in a counter-attack style. Instead of being the ones to attack, we're waiting for them to, like in the next move here, you're going to see pawn to d5. We let them attack, and then we counter-attack based on the weaknesses that they create. Now, at this point in the course, if you started with me from the beginning all the way to lesson 138, you know what happens every time they advance a pawn and they have not been provoked by one of our pawns. Like if we do e5, like we typically do, of course they could do d5, and then e5 is not going to be available. But in this case that they did d5 first, automatically e5 becomes very attractive. And this bishop, not to mention the bishop, becomes really, really powerful. And for us who play these openings with a fianchetto, we really like this bishop. So after d5, now my knight wants to get to e5. However, even though sometimes you see knight e5 directly, what I like to do, what Michael Adams did in this game, was bishop takes f3 first, eliminating the defender of e5. And now without that knight, e5 is going to be completely mine. Of course, d takes e6, we continue to take, hitting the queen, so that's not an option. So after bishop takes, the knight goes to e5, and now the white pieces, guys, on our last lesson, I hope that you went over it, we talked about evaluating positions, how to always come up with a plan, and more specifically, we talked about variable factors and constant factors, right? So the pair of bishops is one that you should remember, and that's why you're gonna see here the white pieces simply put the bishop back to e2. Now, this is very important. There was one game that I showed you, I think it's lesson 110, where I lost to a grandmaster. I was playing the Pirc Defense, and I lost because he did something similar. He actually held on to his pair of bishops. I felt like I was attacking. I was so excited. And then in the end game, he got the pair of bishops out. I got destroyed. So that's what you see right here. Now, after bishop e2, guys, not only are they keeping the bishop in safety, but they're also ready to do f4 and expand on the king side. Now, what's the game for the black pieces in this scenario? We got to the middle game. Many of us, we get confused. We don't really know what to do next. Well, our game here is going to be on the queen side. We want to counterattack. They attacked with d5, now we want to start putting pressure on it, and immediately we want to play on the queen side. They're going to play on the king side. They're better prepared to do so. We're going to create counterplay in the center or the queen side. So after bishop e2, we got, of course, pawn to c6, quickly putting pressure on that pawn, guys. Let's see what they're going to do. At this point, the white pieces went pawn to a4. Notice that they haven't done f4 yet. Doing f4, we simply go back to safety. Let me actually put it in the board, guys, just in case you're concerned about this variation. If f4 happens, we simply go back, and now these pawns are going to be our targets. We're going to try to complicate the game by putting pressure on those pawns, and again, by expanding on the queen side. So, and by the way, c takes c5 is coming, and then the c file is also going to be ours along with the bishop, and you're gonna see that in this game. So of course they went pawn to a4, and now a move that we're more than familiar with. We saw it for the very first time on lesson 51, the check piece, but then we saw it again on lesson 70, the 150 attack against the Pirc Defense. So guys, if this is new to you, just know that those lessons are available and you can access them anytime, right? So after queen a5, we got rook a3, and this is one of those moves that you're like, okay, this is a grandmaster material, right? So very simple. They're basically activating the rook through the third rank, and we have talked about this many times, including, I think there's a lesson we had on the Greek gift where you see Anand playing rook a3. So after rook a3, that rook can not only go to the king side and attack, but it could also go to b3 and put pressure through the b file. So after rook a3, we got rook f to c8, and guys, right now you're gonna start seeing ideas from the Dragon Sicilian. So rook f c8, I told you before, we're just trying to play on the queen side. There's no business for us on the king side. We're going to be focusing on the queen side. So I'm gonna keep my pieces on this side of the board. So after rook f to c8, now we got queen to d2. We know this idea, they're trying to do bishop a6. Also, queen on the same diagonal as my queen, so I have to be very, very careful. So after queen d2, very simple, we're going to take and open up our rook. Not only do we have the rook, we have the queen, we have even the bishop indirectly putting pressure on c3. So I'm liking this position. Also, my knight could go to c4 if I wanted to get one of those bishops. So after e takes d5, now it's the black pieces to move, guys, and this is a good moment for you to pause the video and try to come up with your next move. Try to evaluate the position, candidate moves, and then you compare it to what Michael Adams did here as the black pieces. Well, here, if you actually thought of knight c4, guys, if this is what you do if you were playing this game, then congrats, because this is, if I show you here the engine, that's the top move. Knight c4, and it's going to be a very equal position after knight c4. Then the other two moves that the engine recommends is b6 or knight f to g4. You see, it has to do a lot with getting one of those bishops. Now, in this game, believe it or not, guys, the black pieces did knight f to d7. And pay attention to the evaluation, how it changes. It goes from equal position to 0.94 for the white pieces. That's only if the white pieces do rook to b3. Now, guess what? These Super Grandmaster playing as the white pieces actually continue with rook b3. Now, the reason why we're doing this is not for me to tell you that the engine is better than Michael Adams, right? The reason why I wanted to show you this, guys, is for you to understand that sometimes, even if you don't do the best move, the fact that you are in your elements, that you know the typical plans, is more valuable than doing the best move. So in this case, this Michael Adams, if you look him up, he plays these systems a lot. So he knows the ideas, he knows the general idea. He's not memorizing move by move or anything like that. He makes an inaccuracy here and there, but overall, he knows where his strategy is going, he knows where his game is going. So after knight f to d7, the idea is very simple, opening up the bishop, and again, our game is on the queen side. So this knight is transferring, just like the rook came over from the king side to the queen side, well, the knight is going also to the queen side to help. And pay attention to that knight, because it gets very, very interesting. So after knight f to d7, rook b3, we have to defend the pawn. And now, guys, we're going to do queen c7. So our queen is going back not only to protect the pawn, but also we're doing a battery, again, putting pressure on the queen side. And this is our game with these hyper-modern openings. Just counter-attacking, putting pressure, creating complications. So after queen c7, now the white pieces really wanted to do knight b5. It comes with the tempo, but c2 is going to be hanging. So instead, they had to do rook to c1, a little bit uncomfortable, I have to say, but it was necessary. Now, guys, if I'm the black pieces, I like my position, but I don't like I don't like this knight coming to b5. There's only one move here that makes sense, and that's going to be a6. Simple, just paying attention to my opponent's plans, and we should be fine. So after pawn to a6, we got rook to b4, and look at this. Look at what this Grandmaster is doing. And guys, and I keep saying Grandmaster because these are things that you and I, we wouldn't come up with in a real game, right? So this rook came through the third rank to get to the king side. Now, they couldn't do it. It's not so easy. So now you see the rook going to the fourth rank and again, trying to transfer to the king side. Now, if you get to do rook h4 followed by bishop h6, that's actually pretty powerful. And it's pretty cool to do it without any open lines on the king side. So anyhow, after rook b4, we got knight to c5. So you see our knight, and then bishop h6. Now, if you pause the video and you try to come up with your next move, guys, you should get this one right. We have talked about it so many times, not only in the Pirc defense or the King's Indian defense, but also with the white pieces in the King's Indian attack. Now, on lesson, I want to say lesson 80, I showed you a game that I played myself, and my opponent did something like this. Now, when I see this coming, and my rook is not on f8, then I'm just going to try to preserve the bishop. I don't want to take, you know what's coming if I do that. And if my rook is behind, well, I have no choice. But here, I'm going to save the bishop. And now, again, this bishop is a counter-attacking bishop. It's defending all of the dark squares, but it's also attacking, putting pressure from far away. So very powerful idea. If you didn't know it, now you know it. So bishop f1, and now queen a5 goes back, hitting the rook. The rook is happy to just move. Anyways, the rook wanted to go to the king side, and finally they got this. Now the next move that you're going to see here, guys, is I like it a lot, and you're gonna see that it's not a big deal. There's no reason for me to like it or anything like that, but it has to do with a very simple concept. Sometimes you need to realize when you're about to get in trouble. You have to realize when you make a mistake, you have to accept it and fix it. Right now, not only are they ready to do before, and that's a fork, but also they have three pieces already that could be attacking my king side. I have only one defender, so I have to be paying attention to that. And this is a move that takes a lot of courage to accept and do. So the knight, that knight that we talked about that came over to the king to the queen side, it's now going back to defend in case it is necessary. Now, of course, it's not only about that. We're preventing this before, and we're opening up the rook, which is even more important. So now we again have the rook, the bishop, and the queen putting pressure on c3. So as you can see, it takes a lot of understanding to play this game. Especially for me, guys, when I first saw this game, it was eye-opening because I typically, when I play the Pirc, I would play in the center, the king side, more like a King's Indian defense. But seeing masters using these plans really gave me a different perspective. So anyways, we have now rook e1, ready to do something like f4, hitting the knight, and of course, take on e7. So the next move for black is actually a move that, again, is counter-attacking. It creates threats, but it's also preventing f4. So what could that be? Well, I hope that you thought of either queen b6 or queen c5. So queen b6 happened, I'm hitting b2, and of course, pinning the f pawn. So now we got knight d1, defending the pawn, and the knight finally got back to f6. Guys, there's no shame. If it's necessary, it's necessary. Rather do this than get checkmated. So anyways, everything under control. Now I have two defenders on the king side. So I can see easily one of my knights going to g4. So h3 is the next move. And I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, guys, but it's not like the white pieces are just easily doing whatever they want without worrying about our game. They're also paying attention to our threats. So after h3, we got queen to c5, continue to put pressure. And after c4, now, now I want to see if you have been paying attention to our middle game strategy lessons. Guys, every time that a pawn moves, weaknesses are created. And in this case, c4 is leaving a hole on b4. So this is a weak square, and the black pieces did a great job fixing that pawn structure, securing that b4 square. So a5 was played, and then after bishop e3, we got queen to b4. Of course, I'm not going to go back. Then this knight could just go knight c3, knight b5. So we gotta play energetically, and the way to do so was queen to b4. Now this is a move, I have to say, this is a move that I would consider it in a game, but I would be hesitant to play it because after queen takes, pawn takes, true, we have semi-open files, but after b3, everything is solved, and my pawn on b4 is a double pawn, it is weak, so you really have to understand where you're going with this before you do queen b4. Now, in this game, after pawn to b3, of course, c5 becomes very attractive for our knights. We've seen that square over and over in many middle game positions, so we're very familiar with these position types. So now we're going to bring a knight to c5. Knight goes to d7, bishop d2 hitting the pawn, and then knight to c5 just in time to hit the pawn. But of course, rook e3, easy to defend, and now we're still being attacked. We still have to deal with b4. Now, guys, another critical moment for you to pause the video and try to come up with your next move. So what do we do here? Well, if you pause the video and you came up with a move like 96, shame on you. Shame on you. This is a passive move. We do not want to be passive. Instead, guys, we have to do what we've learned so far. We gotta look at candidate moves. You have to force yourself to look at least 2-3 candidate moves and evaluate them. Players like you and me, what we're going to do, guys, we're going to be so concerned about the pawn that we're going to be like, you know what, I'm going to do knight h6, it doesn't look good, I know it, but I really didn't want to let go of the pawn. Now, players like these super GMs, they look at the game differently. Like in this case, these two rooks are so powerful, but we cannot bring them into the game because of the position, because of the pawn structure. So the next move that the black pieces did here, they did it because they understand this concept. Besides, there's a move here that nobody has realized and is in the air. But anyhow, the next move was to do pawn to e6. Now, what does this have to do with my rooks? Well, very simple. If I start breaking down this pawn structure, guys, then my rooks are going to become really powerful. They're going to dictate the game. And this is important because the white pieces, even though they're putting pressure, their pieces are not coordinated. So we gotta capitalize on this. So of course, from the moment the black pieces did queen b4 here, they anticipated all of this. And now again, after queen b4, queen takes, pawn takes, b3, the knight gets to c5 on time, and then we got pawn to e6. Now, after bishop takes b4, there's a very powerful move here that I'm pretty sure you haven't realized, you haven't seen it, you haven't considered it. Please take your time. And if you find this move, guys, let me know in the comments because it's going to give you a very good idea of the level that you are at this point in the course, right? Now, after bishop b4, if you did not consider g5, no problem. It's hard to consider. So we often think of this perfect fianchetto, very nice to defend the king, but that pawn after g5 is trapping the rook. So now once we get the exchange, this is a different story. So g5 was played. Of course, they could do something like rook h6, but we have bishop g7. Instead, they took the knight, we took the rook, and then they also got a pawn for that exchange. But truth is that from this moment on, it's all about remembering what is it that I have, what is my advantage, and utilizing it. If you have an advantage, in this case, you have more rooks than your opponent. If you don't use those rooks, it's like you don't have the advantage. So we got pawn takes, pawn takes, and then rook d8. You see the rooks start putting pressure, start getting into the game. So after rook d8, we got bishop a3, knight takes d5, rook f3, bishop f6. Look, this bishop was doing nothing on h8. Let's get it active. Let's get the king active as well. So bishop c4, king g7. If they take, now the bishop is not hanging. But again, guys, it's time to activate the king. So knight b2, knight b6, hitting the bishop goes to d3. And I'm going pretty quickly through these moves because it's just pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of activating your pieces and not blundering. So finally, rook a to c8. All of my pieces are active, especially my rooks on these open files. So knight to c4, happy to simplify the game. I'm ahead. Bishop c4, check. Again, guys, notice how for the last few moves it's been rook, 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 right? So bishop e5 check, and then none of my pieces should be hanging. So after getting rid of my double pawn, I take, we got check, and then pawn to f6. None of my pieces are going to be hanging. That bishop is going to be in the center, dominating the entire board and making it difficult for this bishop to find a good diagonal. So bishop b4, then rook b2, still on the 7th rank, bishop c3, we trade, we keep simplifying the game, getting to this endgame where we have two rooks versus rook and bishop, and just finding a way. Say that rook is just finding a file to get down there. So this one was blocked, we find a new one, and then all the way to e1. So h4, b6, g4, just activating our king. And guys, of course it could never, let me go back here just in case, they could never take this pawn because then we're just going to collect the bishop. So rook has to go to c3, the king keeps getting active, and again, this is just really, really powerful. So rook f3, rook e4, hitting the pawn, check, check, and now this is just Sux1. The rook has to go over to defend, and now my king could do whatever we want. We could even think of things like this, bringing the king over, and at the right moment, just simplify everything, collect the pawns, and promote. So king f4. Now, I know that all of you know how painful being in Sux1 is, so they push the pawn, we collect it. Now, we bring the king to the queen side, and guys, again, back to this position. Now we could just simplify everything and then go for this pawn. Let's say they do something like this, getting away from the pin. Well, we take, and this should be an easy kings and pawns endgame for us to win. So there you go. I hope that you actually found value in this game. And if you're new to this channel, guys, feel free to check out the entire playlist. We have covered almost every line of the piece. And if you're not, well, don't forget that one of the best ways to learn any opening is to review Master Game. That said, before you go, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe, and I will see you on lesson number 140.